Hey there, welcome in that new Golem tutorial. In this video we'll show you how to export feet geometry in order to generate footprints in Houdini or whatever is your favorite DCC for that. So I'm running Golem 7.3.6 but if you're using any Golem 7 version that shouldn't be really different here. So in that scene here, let's first start with exporting your simulation. So let's go into the simulation exporter and create a simulation cache. And once it will be done, it will create from you automatically a simulation cache proxy. That simulation cache proxy, let's take a look. It handles all the attributes which are related to where the cache has been exported, what's the name of the character file, and what's the path of the character file that you are using. So what we're going to do is, we're going to tackle this using two different strategies, and both strategies will consider changing what's within that file here. So let's talk about the first strategy here. So that character that we see within the viewports, let's open it. So it's made of two parts. It's made of the skeleton part and it's made of the geometry part. So this is how does the geometry looks like. So you've got all your different groups of meshes, the hair meshes, the undercoats, which has a variation here, which can be either the t-shirt or the sweatshirt, the pants, the shoes, the body head, the body arm, the body feet, and the flag. And what we want to do here is only keep the shoes there. So within that character, it's made in some proper way. So I'm having a separated mesh for the shoes. But if it's not your case, you might consider maybe creating a different mesh. So it can be part of the character, or you can create another mesh and include this into your character file. So it's really up to you. We've got tutorials which show you how to do that. Within that tutorial, I'm going to stick by using that geo there that I'm already having. Also, it may be also relevant to maybe make a proxy geometry, super low def, just only maybe the bottom part of the shoes. So really up to you here what you want to do. I'll just show you how you keep it within the character file. So this is my shoes here connected to the shoe mesh and the material, but we don't really care about the material. So what we'd like to do is create another version of that file. So let me close this. So we're going to create a casual manlight GCHA version, a footprint version, which only stores the meshes. So we're going to remove all the connection except for the shoes, and we're going to be good. And for that to be applied into your simulation, we're also going to create another simulation cache proxy. This is not mandatory, but that's just to make things easier in terms of pipeline. So what we want to do is duplicate that that node, and you can see all these attributes here are yellowed. So it means that if I right click, I can see where they come from. They come from the crowd manager node, which is that node here, which handles all the global simulation parameters. It's kind of the nucleus for Golem. And whenever you open the simulation cache exporter and you write something here, it's going to be written into the manager, and your simulation cache proxies will be updated with those new values. So if I change my cache name here and then export the simulation, my cache proxy will not point to that new cache name. That is made to make sure that your cache proxy always points on the latest cache you've been exporting. So if you'd like, you can create another simulation cache proxy using that node here, that button here. If I click on this one, you'll have now a warning which tells you there's already a simulation cache proxy node with the same simulation cache files, and that proxy node is called cache proxy shape1. Would you like to create a simulation cache proxy still? So that just let you know that there's already a simulation here with the same attributes, so we'd like to recreate a cache, and you can say yes. And now you end up with another cache proxy node which has the exact same attribute than the manager, which means that it has the same attribute than the first cache proxy. So this is one way of creating this. So let's rename that node and call that FP for footprints. Let's say maybe for some reasons within your cache proxy it's not connected to your manager anymore. what you can do is use the library as a proxy tool to recreate nodes. So here I just opened the library from here. I'm having multiple tabs. I just stick into that one here. I'm gonna select my cache proxy node, press on that button, and it's gonna create a vignette which has as attributes all the same attributes than the one we've been seeing here. And if I want, I can click back on that vignette again, and you can see it creates a new cache proxy node. That one will not be attached to the manager anymore, and it has the exact same attribute than that one here. So two different ways depending on what you need to do here, generating cache proxies. But we already have one in our scene, so let's keep that one here. So that one here is enable, that one here is enable. So let's disable that one. So now we've got that cache proxy, which will handle the display of that simulation for us. It's great. So the second thing we want to do is edit that character file. So I'm going to break the connection so I can change fully this. And I'm going to go into my character maker and break the connection that I don't need anymore. So I'm going to remove the feet, the flag, and the head, and only keep the shoes. It's great. So final note maybe about this, node here also stores the geometry. So this is just the names of the geometry you're gonna display within the viewport or render, and that actual node stores a file called GCG Golaem character geometry. That guy stores the actual vertices, positions, the normals, the UVs. We don't store them within the XML file because that will not be optimal, and we can create multiple versions of the GCG with different level of details. So those are going to be listed here. So you don't really have to update that guy here, because what we're going to ask is to display just a subset of that geometry. That file contains all the meshes, but we're going to ask only to display the shoes. So you can stick with that one here, or you can make maybe another version of the geometry depending on your pipeline constraints. But if I had to, I wouldn't do it. If I was in a production context, I wouldn't create another character geometry file because it's not really mandatory, and that will just have 1 extra seconds on the loading at render time on the process. So it's not really worth it if you ask me. And what we're going to do is save that file as another version of it. So we're going to save it as casual manlight underscore fp for footprints. I'm going to save it here. We want to replace because I made some tests previously. And now we've got a version of the character which just tells that my character is made only of the shoes. And within my proxy node, I can just ask to change this. And now I end up with only my footprints, because this is the only meshes I've been asked to assign. If you were using a proxy geometry, you will have those proxy geometry being assigned to your characters as well. Or if you want to have just the bottom part of the shoes, because here I'm still having the above part, which may not be required by your FX artist, you can change that. You can just add an extra mesh or edit that mesh here. It's great. So now that we have this, we can go within the Alembic Baker, and so each cache proxy here gets attached to a render proxy. So this is part of the node. That cache proxy handles the display of the character, but they get attached to the render proxy, which handles the rendering part of those caches, and those are connected to the cache proxy node. So when you change something on the cache proxy, it will change it on the render proxy. So if I render this, or if I bake export this, you'll have only the shoes being exported. So make sure to select the right render proxy, so that guy is not being renamed, but probably we can rename that render proxy FP. And if you export this, you only end up with the shoes, so a super light file, which will be exported also much more faster and will not contain, all the complex geometries or the clothes or the fur, if you have any, onto your characters. So way more easier to handle. Great. You can also bring that in within Houdini. So within the library tool here, I'm going to create maybe another version. I'm going to create a version of that file. So it's called FP export here, and save this. And if I go within Houdini and use the Houdini plugin, we can open the Smoosh Cache library. Open the same library file here and bring that in, and now you end up with that feet geometry being displayed way more faster, also that having the full geometry. And if you want to get the full version of the character, it's just a matter of changing the name of this, and now you'll get the full geometry of your characters being appearing. And let's go back to FP to only have the footprints. Great. So that's the first strategy here, means making multiple versions of the character file. Let me show you another strategy here, which will only keep one character file. So what I'm going to do is delete that cache proxy node here and enable the previous one that we had. And we're going to edit that character file there. So let's open that character file. Let's close the previous one that we had. And let's see how does the geometry looks like. So within the character geometry, character maker and the geometry tab, we can create multiple versions of the geometry repartition here. I'm having a repartition for the t-shirt versus the sweatshirt, and with the short pants versus the long pants. But we could probably create a version which has all those assets and that sub repartition, and another one which just has the shoes, and we can weight those. So we can create maybe multiple rendering types, one which will be the regular crowdman type, and one which will be the footprint only rendering type. So for doing that, I'm going to make a new asset group here, which I'm going to call maybe a regular character. And that regular character, I'm going to connect it to that. Okay, if I want it to be active, I need to connect it to the geo there first. And then I'm going to connect it to the flag. I'm using the middle mouse button here, dragging from regular to my actual children here, there, almost there, and need to include the hair. So I'm making an extra level of hierarchy here. So I'm going to group all my repetitions under a regular group. And I'm going to explain later why I'm doing this. And now I'm going to do something which I'm probably going to call a picker, which will be the one handling the weighting system for me. And I'm going to make it as an intermediate node and bring out that connection. Okay. And finally, I'm going to create my other type here, my other variation. So I'm going to call that footprints probably, and put it here. Oops. Okay. And that footprint type will only point on the shoes or whatever the geometry you want to use for your proxy. And final step is that picker. I'm going to say it's a variation. So I'm going to click on that button here, and you can see now those weights appears, which means now I can control that weighting system here. So that weighting system means that I can have either a weight which points to regular, which connects all those geometries there, or I can have another group which is called footprint, which only references the shoes. And within my rendering type now, I'll have the control on top of, do I want to use the regular or the footprint? So for my default type that I'm having here, I want to make sure to put whatever the value here. I want to make sure to put the 0 footprint here. Else I'll have some characters being only footprints, some characters being regular, and the regular type is the actual type being used by default into here. So I want to make sure that it's not changing here. And what I want to do is probably create another type there that I'm gonna call probably maybe footprint. Well, let's call that crowdmanlight underscore FP. Okay. And within that node here, I'm going to say this weight is going to be put to 0. So 100% of my characters will be the footprint types. And I'm going to save this because that's an XML file which is referenced within the node. So to be applied, it needs to be saved. And now I can change my actual rendering type on my characters. So the rendering type by default is going to be assigned within the entity type. When you create an entity type, you can see you've got your crowdmanlight assignment here, and I even have my, there's a mistake here, but my crowdmanlight FP that I would be able to assign from here. But the thing is, if I assign it from here, that's from the simulation part, so it means that I'll have to re-export the cache because that data of the rendering type assignment is going to be stored in the cache. So that's really not optimal. I don't want to re-export the cache anytime I want to change which rendering type I want to assign to my characters. So rather than re-exporting the cache, I can actually use the layout to do that. There's a layer which allows to change the rendering type on some specific characters. So I'll be able to select all the characters here and ask to edit the rendering type. So first, let's recreate maybe a render proxy. Yes, please. Let's sorry. Let's hide that first one here. Let's okay, the assets changed for some reason here. And let's call that one cache proxy shape FP. And we're gonna create a layout file on top of that new proxy. So anytime you're having multiple proxies, you have multiple tabs here in which you can change the layout. And you've got the layout for the first one, the layout for the second one, the one with FP. So I'm gonna drag and drop some nodes here. So first node I'm gonna drag is a selector to select everybody. So I'm gonna select that node here, put a star. So it means that star means it affects all the characters. And then I want to change their rendering type. So I'm gonna use the set rendering type layer. I can drag and drop it and connect it if I want. Or I can double click and it will connect to the defaultly selected node which was before. And here so I can control which rendering type I'm gonna use here. So I can go there and say that I want to use the footprints. If for some reasons, by the way, your drop down hasn't updated with the actual types, so here I created my two types and luckily it updates, but sometimes it doesn't update properly. So if you're into that situation, what you can do is within the cache proxy node, make sure to refresh the cache. And when you refresh the cache, it's going to reload all the parsers, but also all the character files. And that means that all the rendering type will be reloaded. And what I want to do here is say that I want to use the CrowdManLight FP. And I'm going to save that file as a layout file. And now it's the same mechanism than before. So it means that now if I go within my render proxy, I can select my render proxy 2, which has the layout. And by the way, the layout, we can see it here. We can disable that layout to see how does the character appear without any layout, or we can disable it from here. Here, that's because we can have multiple layers, multiple levels. So really up to you here. We can also have maybe within the original proxy, we could have loaded that layout and maybe enable it or disable it when we need it. Multiple strategies here. And that render proxy, so you can bake it out and get your Alembic file being later. And you can also maybe within the library, let's remove that one here, select that cache proxy and import this and save it. And within Houdini, we can go into the library, refresh that, okay, and import it, and we'll get that now. We've got the enable layout mode with the actual layout file, and if we disable the layout, we can get in and out our characters. So what's the difference between those two strategies? And the second one, we're gonna load the full geometry of the characters and make the deformation internally within Golem, but only display the shoes. With the first version, what we're gonna do is just deform the shoes. So it will be slightly faster with the first strategies, but to be honest, the display is what's taking most of the time within Houdini. So sure, we'll deform less geometry, but at the end, I'm pretty sure that if you don't have hundreds of thousands of characters, that will not make a difference. Also, please note that within Golem, we've got a Alembic. Oops, let's go back within Maya, sorry. Within Golem, when you bake the simulation, we've got something called the point cache exporter. So it means that rather than exporting the full geometry within Alembic, we're going to export a point cache for every bone. So you end up with kind of particles with a lot of additional data on it. which will represent the bone. So if you got a bone on your feet or on your ankles, you can also export this. That's a super light file, and we've got a tutorial which covers that part, so you can get an idea of how you can handle that file. So hopefully that helps. Once again, two strategy. One is you create multiple character files, two character files. One which is the regular one which only lists the geometry you need. Keep in mind that you don't have to exactly use the same geometry. Here I'm using the same geometry than my actual characters, but you can create maybe just a box, just a plane, just some really low def geo that you're going to list into the character file. That's the same philosophy behind. So that's the first strategy. And the second strategy is you can create just multiple rendering types, and you can have one rendering type which only displays that proxy geometry or that sub geometry of your characters, and only display that one using the layout tools and the set rendering type layer. So hope that makes sense. Let us know if you got any question, and see you into the next video.